The Texas sun hung low over Atascosa County, painting the Henderson Ranch in shades of burnt orange and deep gold. Robert "Bobby" Henderson stood on the wraparound porch of the century-old farmhouse, his calloused hands gripping a mug of coffee that had long gone cold. At 58 years old, his face told the story of a life lived outdoors. Deep lines carved by sun and wind, eyes that had witnessed both abundance and loss, and a jaw set with the stubborn pride that defined Texas ranchers. The land stretched out before him, 540 acres of rolling pasture, mesquite trees, and memories that went back 4 generations. This wasn't just property, it was the Henderson legacy, purchased in 1897 by his great-grandfather William Henderson, a Confederate veteran who'd rebuilt his life one fence post at a time. Bobby could still remember his own father, Daniel Henderson, teaching him to ride horses along the creek bed that divided the north and south pastures, showing him how to read the sky for coming storms, and explaining that land wasn't something you owned. It was something that owned you right back. But legacy didn't pay mortgages. Bobby walked down the porch steps, his boots kicking up dust that hadn't seen rain in 47 days. The drought of 2024 had been brutal, killing off 30% of his cattle herd and forcing him to sell breeding stock he'd spent years developing. Then came the disease, bovine respiratory complications that swept through what remained of his herd, costing him thousands in veterinary bills and lost income. He'd dipped into savings, then into the emergency fund, and finally into credit that charged interest rates that made his stomach turn. The real problem, though, was older than his troubles. Much older. In 1983, his father had taken out a second mortgage on the ranch to expand their operation during the oil boom. Daniel Henderson had been a good rancher, but a poor businessman. And when oil prices collapsed in '86, that loan had become an albatross. Bobby had been making payments for decades, but the fine print his father never fully understood included balloon payments and adjustable rates that had ballooned the principal. Now, with his recent losses, the bank was calling in the debt. All of it. Within 90 days. $340,000. Bobby walked past the main barn where his prized quarter horses, the few he hadn't yet sold, watched him with dark, intelligent eyes. He'd already let go of 2 ranch hands, keeping only Miguel Contreras, his foreman of 20 years, who'd agreed to stay on at reduced pay until things improved. If things improved. "Morning, boss." Miguel appeared from the tack room, carrying a saddle that needed repair. At 49, Miguel was built like mesquite, lean, tough, and impossible to break. His family had worked the Henderson Ranch for 2 generations, and Bobby knew Miguel felt the weight of this crisis almost as heavily as he did. "Miguel," Bobby nodded, trying to keep his voice steady. "How's the north fence?" "Needs replacing in 3 sections. Wires rusted through." Miguel set the saddle down, his expression careful. "I can patch it for now. Make it last another season." Another season. The words hung between them like a prayer neither man believed would be answered. "Do what you can." Bobby looked toward the eastern pasture, where 23 head of Angus cattle grazed on grass that was more brown than green. "I'm heading into Jourdanton this afternoon. Meeting with Patterson at the bank." Miguel's jaw tightened. Richard Patterson had been the bank manager for 8 years. A transplant from Houston who'd never worked a day outdoors and seemed to view ranchers as quaint relics of a dying industry. "You want company?" "No, but I appreciate it." Bobby clapped Miguel on the shoulder. "Keep an eye on Daisy. She's due to foal any day now." "Will do." Miguel hesitated, then added, "Claire called earlier. Said she's driving down from Austin tonight." Bobby's chest tightened. Claire, his daughter, his only child. the brightest light in his life since her mother Helen had passed from cancer 6 years ago. Claire had moved to Tennessee after college, built a career teaching high school English in Nashville, and only recently returned to Texas to be closer to him. She'd taken a teaching position in Austin, 2 hours north, but visited every other weekend. He hadn't told her how bad things were. "She say why?" Bobby asked. "Just that she needs to talk to you about something important." Miguel picked up the saddle again. "Boss, I know it's not my place, but Claire's smart. Maybe she can help figure something out." Bobby wanted to argue, to say that this was his burden to carry. But the truth was, he'd run out of options. The meeting at the bank this afternoon would likely be his last chance to negotiate an extension. And Patterson had made it clear that extensions were unlikely given current market conditions and risk assessment parameters. Fancy words that meant the bank wanted its money and didn't care about 4 generations of Henderson's sweat. The morning passed in familiar rhythms. Bobby checked water troughs, inspected cattle for signs of illness, and spent an hour in the equipment shed trying to coax life from a tractor that was older than disco. The physical work helped quiet his mind, but it couldn't silence the steady drumbeat of anxiety that had become his constant companion. At 1:30, he showered, changed into a clean button-down shirt and his good jeans, and climbed into his 2015 Ford F-250. The truck had 200,000 miles on it and a temperamental air conditioner, but it started reliably, which was more than could be said for his financial situation. The drive to Jourdanton took 20 minutes along Farm Road 140, past ranches that looked as weathered as his own. The Texas countryside was beautiful in its harshness, all big sky and endless horizon. But Bobby couldn't shake the feeling that he was seeing it as a condemned man sees the sunrise on his last morning. First National Bank of Atascosa County occupied a modern brick building that looked absurdly out of place among Jourdanton's historic storefronts. Bobby parked in the half-empty lot and sat for a moment, gathering himself. Through the glass doors, he could see tellers helping customers, people going about normal business while his entire world teetered on the edge of collapse. He got out of the truck. Richard Patterson's office was on the second floor, all glass and chrome and motivational posters about success and growth. Patterson himself sat behind an enormous desk, his tie perfectly knotted, his face wearing the practiced sympathy of someone who'd foreclosed on dozens of families and slept fine afterward. "Mr. Henderson, please sit down." Patterson gestured to a leather chair that was too low, a psychological trick that made visitors look up at the person behind the desk. Bobby sat anyway. "I assume you've reviewed the documents I sent?" Patterson folded his hands. His college ring, Texas A&M, Bobby noted with bitter irony, a school built on agricultural traditions, glinting in the fluorescent light. "I did." Bobby kept his voice level. "I'm here to discuss options." "Options!" Patterson smiled, and it didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Henderson, we've extended your loan 3 times over the past 18 months. The bank has been extraordinarily patient, but patience isn't infinite. You're currently 60 days past due on your regular payment, and the balloon payment comes due in 87 days. That's $340,000 plus accrued interest." "I understand the numbers." Bobby leaned forward. "I'm asking for one more extension. 6 months. The cattle market improves in spring, and I've got buyers interested in 3 of my horses. I can make a substantial payment by May and have the rest by fall." Patterson opened a folder, made a show of reviewing papers Bobby knew he'd already memorized. "Your current assets are insufficient collateral for the existing loan, much less an extension. The appraisal we commissioned shows your property value has declined due to drought conditions and market factors. You're underwater, Mr. Henderson." The words hit like a physical blow. Underwater. After 4 generations, after surviving the Depression and 2 world wars and every economic crisis in between, his family's ranch was worth less than they owed. Then, let me sell part of it. Bobby heard the desperation in his own voice and hated it. The South Pasture, 200 acres. It borders the highway. Good access. That would cover most of the balloon payment. Selling under duress rarely yields fair market value. And the bank's position is that partial payment doesn't address the fundamental issue. Your operation is no longer viable. Patterson closed the folder with decisive finality. I'm sorry, Mr. Henderson, but unless you can pay the full amount by March 10th, we'll have no choice but to begin foreclosure proceedings. Bobby sat in silence. Around him, the office hummed with air conditioning and distant phone conversations. Through the window, he could see Jordanton's water tower, painted with the town's motto, "Small town, big heart." The irony was suffocating. Is there anything else I can help you with today? Patterson was already standing, already moving toward the door, already writing off Bobby Henderson as yesterday's problem. No. Bobby stood, his knees aching from the quick motion. Thank you for your time. He walked out of the bank in a daze, barely registering the afternoon heat or the sympathetic look from a teller who'd gone to school with Claire. By the time he reached his truck, his hands were shaking. The drive home was a blur. Bobby found himself taking the long way, past the property line where his great-grandfather had planted live oaks in 1900, past the creek where he'd taught Claire to fish, past the small family cemetery where 4 generations of Hendersons rested under native stone markers. How could he be the one to lose it all? When he pulled up to the farmhouse, Claire's Honda Accord was already parked in the driveway. His daughter stood on the porch, wearing jeans and a faded University of Texas sweatshirt, her auburn hair pulled back in a ponytail. At 32, Claire had her mother's delicate features and Bobby's stubborn chin. She smiled when she saw him, but it didn't hide the concern in her eyes. "Hey, Dad." She came down the steps as he got out of the truck. "You okay? You look tired." "Long day." He hugged her, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo, letting himself take comfort in the simple fact of her presence. "Miguel said you needed to talk about something." "I do. But first, have you eaten?" "I brought barbecue from City Market in Luling." Despite everything, Bobby's stomach growled. He hadn't eaten since breakfast. "That sounds perfect." They sat at the kitchen table, the same scarred oak table where Bobby had eaten meals his entire life, and Claire spread out brisket, ribs, potato salad, and beans. For a few minutes, they ate in comfortable silence, the kind of quiet that only exists between people who've known each other forever. Finally, Claire set down her fork. "Dad, I need you to be honest with me. What's going on with the ranch?" Bobby looked at his daughter, at her intelligent eyes and determined expression, and felt something crack inside him. The pride, the stubborn insistence on handling everything alone, the fear of burdening her with his failures, it all crumbled. "I'm losing it, Claire Bear." The old childhood nickname slipped out. "I'm losing everything." And then he told her. Everything. The drought, the disease, the mounting debt, the balloon payment, and Patterson's clinical dismissal of 4 generations of Henderson legacy as no longer viable. Claire listened without interrupting, her expression shifting from concern to anger to determination. When he finished, she reached across the table and took his hand. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because you're my daughter. I'm supposed to protect you, not drag you into my messes. I'm 32 years old, Dad. I'm not a little girl anymore." She squeezed his hand. "And this isn't a mess. It's life. Bad luck and worse timing. But we're going to figure this out." "Claire, there's nothing to figure out. I've explored every option. I met with the bank today and— What if we did a fundraiser? Claire interrupted, her voice gaining energy. A big community event. Atascosa County rallies around its own. We could do a benefit dinner, maybe an auction. You've helped half the ranchers in this county over the years, Dad. They'd show up. Bobby wanted to believe her, but decades of hard experience made him skeptical. Honey, we'd need to raise $340,000 in less than 3 months. People around here are good folks, but they're not wealthy. Most of them are struggling just like me. Then we think bigger. Claire pulled out her phone, already typing notes. We market it beyond Atascosa County. Make it a real Texas event. Music, food, auction items from local businesses. We could even live stream it. Get donations online. Dad, you have to let me try. Looking at his daughter's determined face, Bobby felt something he hadn't experienced in months. Hope. It was fragile and probably foolish, but it was there. Okay, we can try. Claire grinned, and suddenly she looked 12 years old again. The little girl who'd insisted she could break the wildest horse on the ranch through patience and carrots. First thing tomorrow, we start planning. I'll talk to everyone I know, reach out to the Chamber of Commerce, contact local media. This is going to work, Dad. I promise you, this is going to work. Bobby nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Outside, the sun was setting over land that had belonged to his family for 128 years. Tomorrow, they would begin fighting for it. Tonight, for the first time in months, Bobby Henderson let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, they wouldn't have to fight alone. The next morning arrived with the kind of crystalline clarity that only December in South Texas could produce. Cool enough to need a jacket, but warm enough to remind you that winter here was a negotiation rather than a conquest. Claire was up before dawn, sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop open and 3 legal pads covered in notes. She'd barely slept, her mind racing with possibilities and plans. Bobby emerged from his bedroom at 5:30, following the smell of fresh coffee. "You been up all night?" "Just a couple hours." Claire looked up, her eyes bright despite the early hour. "I've been making lists, people to contact, venues to consider, potential auction items. Dad, I think we should do this at the ranch. It'll be more meaningful, more personal. People can see what they're helping to save." Bobby poured himself coffee and sat down across from her. "The ranch doesn't have facilities for a big event. No proper parking, no bathrooms for crowds. We can rent portable facilities, set up the main event in the north pasture. It's flat and has that beautiful view of the creek. We'll need a stage, sound system, lighting." Claire was writing as she talked, her pen flying across the page. "Miguel mentioned you still have those portable fencing panels from when you used to do brandings. We can use those to create lanes for parking." Despite his exhaustion, Bobby felt a smile tugging at his mouth. When Claire got an idea in her head, she was like a border collie herding sheep, focused, tireless, and impossible to distract. "You've really thought this through." "I've been thinking about nothing else." She reached for a manila folder she'd set on the table. "I also did something last night. I went through all of Grandpa Daniel's old papers in the study, the ones in those banker boxes you've never sorted through." Bobby's expression darkened. After his father's death in 2008, Bobby had boxed up Daniel's business records and personal correspondence, intending to organize everything properly. 17 years later, those boxes sat untouched in the study, a task perpetually postponed because it meant confronting his father's mistakes. "Claire, those papers are just going to make you sad. Dad was a good man, but a terrible businessman." "I know, but I found something interesting." Claire opened the folder and pulled out a yellowed newspaper clipping, carefully preserved in a plastic sleeve. Do you remember the Strait family? Bobby frowned. The name sounds familiar, but I can't place them. They were our neighbors back in the early 1960s. According to this article from the Pleasanton Express, dated August 1963, there was a massive fence fire, probably started by lightning, that threatened to burn through 5 ranches, including theirs. Grandpa Daniel organized all the neighboring ranchers to help contain it. They saved the Strait property and 2 others. Bobby took the clipping, his eyes scanning the faded text. There it was, a photo of his father looking impossibly young, standing with a group of soot-covered ranchers. The caption read, "Local ranchers battle blaze on Farm Road 140. Daniel Henderson, center, coordinated the volunteer effort that saved 3 properties from destruction." "I remember Dad talking about a big fire when I was a kid," Bobby said slowly, "but I don't remember the Straits. That's because they moved soon after, according to the county records I found online. But Dad, look at the name listed as the property owner." Claire pointed to a line in the article. Bobby read it aloud. "John Byron Strait Sr., rancher, grateful for the neighborly assistance that saved his family's livelihood and home." He looked up at Claire, something clicking in his memory. John Byron Strait Sr. That was George Strait's father. Claire's smile was triumphant. Exactly. George Strait's family owned the ranch that bordered ours. Grandpa Daniel helped save their property, and according to this article, they were neighbors for several years before the Straits sold and moved closer to Pearsall. Bobby set down the clipping, his mind reeling. George Strait, the king of country music, a man who'd sold more records than any country artist in history, had grown up on property that touched Henderson land. More than that, Bobby's father had helped George's father in a moment of crisis. "This is incredible," Bobby said quietly. "But Claire, what are you thinking? That we should contact George Strait and ask for help because of something that happened 60 years ago? Not ask for help." Claire's voice was firm. "Invite him to the fundraiser. Tell him the story. Let him know what this event means. And see if he'd be willing to make an appearance. Dad, George Strait, still lives in Texas, still ranches in Medina County. He understands this life. And from everything I've read about him, he's a private person, but incredibly loyal to the ranching community." Bobby wanted to dismiss the idea immediately, his pride recoiling from what felt like begging a celebrity for charity. But looking at his daughter's hopeful face, at the evidence of her sleepless nights spent trying to save his legacy, he couldn't bring himself to shoot her down. "How would we even reach him?" Bobby asked. "People like George Strait have managers, assistants, people whose job is to keep ordinary folks away. We start with his team roping connections." Claire pulled out another sheet of paper. "I found out he competes regularly in team roping events across Texas. There's a circuit, an actual community of ropers. We can reach out through that network. Someone has to know someone." Bobby rubbed his face, feeling the rasp of morning stubble. "This feels like a long shot." "Everything about this situation is a long shot," Claire countered. "But what do we have to lose? The worst that happens is we don't hear back. The best that happens is George Strait shows up to honor a connection between his family and ours. And suddenly this fundraiser gets attention we couldn't buy with $1 million advertising budget." She was right, and Bobby knew it. They were already facing impossible odds. Adding one more impossibility to the list didn't make things worse. "Okay," he said, "but we don't put all our eggs in this basket. We plan the fundraiser assuming George Strait never responds, never shows up. We make it good enough to succeed on its own." "Agreed." Claire grabbed a fresh legal pad. "So let's talk about the event itself. When should we do it?" They spent the next 3 hours planning, their conversation punctuated by more coffee and the breakfast tacos Miguel brought over at 7:30. The foreman listened to their ideas, offered suggestions, and volunteered to handle the logistics of preparing the North Pasture for a large event. "My cousin Javier does event staging in San Antonio," Miguel said. "He owes me a favor. I can probably get us sound system and lighting at cost." "That would be incredible." Claire added it to her list. "What about local businesses for auction items? Dixie Dude Ranch over in Bandera might donate a weekend stay," Miguel suggested. "And there's that custom bootmaker in Jourdanton. Risky's. Maybe a gift certificate." The list grew. They would need tables and chairs, a catering tent, permits from the county, insurance, advertising, and about 1,000 other details that made Bobby's head spin. But with each item they tackled, the event began to feel real. Not just a desperate fantasy, but an actual possibility. At 10 o'clock, Claire looked up from her laptop. "I'm going to start making calls. I want to talk to the Atascosa County Chamber of Commerce, the local newspaper, and at least 3 event planners to get quotes." "Dad, can you make a list of everyone you know who might donate auction items or services?" "I can do that." Bobby stood, his old bones creaking. "I need to check on Daisy anyway." Miguel said she was showing signs. Outside, the December morning had warmed to a comfortable 70 degrees. Bobby walked to the Foaling Barn, a newer structure he'd built in 2010 when horse breeding had seemed like a smart diversification strategy. Daisy, a beautiful bay quarter horse, stood in the largest stall, her sides swollen with the foal she'd been carrying for 11 months. "Hey there, girl." Bobby slipped into the stall, running his hand along her neck. Daisy nickered softly, her dark eyes calm. "You getting ready to make me a grandfather again?" He checked her carefully, noting the signs that birth was imminent. Relaxed muscles, dropped belly, restlessness. By tonight or tomorrow, there would be a new life on the Henderson Ranch. The thought struck him as both beautiful and tragic. Would this foal grow up here, on land his family had held for generations? Or would it be born into the last days of the Henderson legacy? A beginning that coincided with an ending? Bobby pushed the dark thoughts away and focused on the routine. He refreshed Daisy's water, added clean straw to her bedding, and made sure the foaling supplies were ready. Then he moved on to the other horses, 5 quarter horses of exceptional bloodlines. The kind of animals that should have commanded premium prices, but couldn't find buyers in a market flooded with desperate sellers. By the time he finished his rounds and returned to the house, it was nearly noon. Claire was on the phone, her voice animated as she explained the fundraiser to someone on the other end. She waved at Bobby and pointed to a list on the table. Bobby picked it up and read, "Confirmed so far. Chamber of Commerce will promote event. Pleasanton Express will do feature story. Austin American Statesman interested. My contact from teaching. Event planner from Floresville can do it for reduced rate. Miguel's cousin can provide stage, sound, lights, 50% off. County permits application in progress." Below that, a second list. Potential auction items. Weekend stay at Dixie Dude Ranch, waiting for callback. Custom boots from Risky's, confirmed. Dinner for 4 at Clear Springs Restaurant, confirmed. Private riding lesson with you, Dad. My idea. You're amazing with horses. Hand-tooled leather saddle. Need to ask Thomas Whitaker if he'll donate. Bobby stared at that 4th item. Private riding lesson with you, Dad. When had he become someone whose time was valuable enough to auction? Then again, he'd spent 40 years training horses and riders. Maybe Claire was right. Maybe his skills had worth beyond what he could see. Claire ended her call and turned to him, her face flushed with excitement. That was Diane Pritchard from the Tourism Board. She thinks we can get this listed on the official Texas Hill Country events calendar. Dad, people from Austin, San Antonio, even Houston might see this. That's great, honey. Bobby set down the list. But I want to make sure we're being realistic. Even with all this publicity, we're talking about raising hundreds of thousands of dollars. I know. That's why we need to think beyond just auction items. We should sell tickets, make it an actual event people pay to attend. Live music, Texas barbecue, maybe even a small rodeo demonstration. Make it something special that people want to be part of. Claire's eyes suddenly went wide. Oh my God, Dad, what if we did a team roping exhibition? You still rope, Miguel ropes, and I bet we could get a dozen good ropers to participate. People love watching that. Bobby found himself nodding. Team roping was in his blood, a sport he'd competed in during his younger years and still practiced for fun. The idea of showcasing it at the fundraiser felt right. Authentically Texan, entertaining, and directly connected to the ranching heritage they were trying to save. We could do that, he admitted. Set up in the South Arena, do a few runs, maybe let the crowd try their hand at roping a dummy steer. Perfect! Claire was writing again, her energy seemingly inexhaustible. Now, about George Strait. I want to write him a letter. A real letter, not an email. Something personal that explains the connection between our families and invites him to participate if he's interested. No pressure, just an open door. Bobby considered this. A letter felt right, old-fashioned, respectful. The kind of gesture his father's generation would have appreciated. What would you say? Claire pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and began drafting. Dear Mr. Strait, my name is Claire Henderson, and I'm writing to you about a connection between our families that goes back more than 60 years. My grandfather, Daniel Henderson, was your father's neighbor in Atascosa County in the early 1960s. In August of 1963, when a fence fire threatened your family's ranch, my grandfather organized the local ranchers who helped save your property. I'm reaching out now because my father, Robert Henderson, is facing the possible loss of our family's ranch, the same land my grandfather worked, and his father before him, going back to 1897. We're organizing a community fundraiser, and I wanted to invite you to be part of it. Not as a celebrity, but as someone who understands what this land and this life mean to people like us. I know your time is valuable, and your privacy is important. We're not asking for money or expecting anything, but if you happen to be available and interested in honoring the connection our families share, we would be deeply grateful for your presence. Whether or not we hear back, thank you for the music, the integrity, and the example you've set for those of us who love Texas and the ranching life. Respectfully, Claire Henderson. She read it aloud, then looked at her father. Too much? Not enough? Bobby's throat was tight. It's perfect. Now I just need to figure out how to get it to him. Claire opened her laptop again. I'm going to start with the Texas Team Roping Association. Someone there has to have a connection. While Claire worked her phone and computer, Bobby made the list she'd requested. People who might contribute auction items or services. It was humbling to write down names and realize how many people he'd helped over the years. A loan to the Ramirez family when their well went dry. Free use of his equipment when the Johnson Ranch needed to clear brush after a tornado. That time, he'd spent 3 days helping the widow Patterson, no relation to the banker, round up her scattered cattle after a fence break. The ranching community operated on reciprocity and memory. Bobby had never expected repayment for any of those acts. They were simply what neighbors did for each other. But now, writing down those names, he realized that Claire was right. These people might actually show up. They might actually help. The afternoon dissolved into a flurry of phone calls, emails, and planning. Claire contacted everyone on her list, explaining the situation and asking for support. Bobby called friends and acquaintances, his natural reticence making the asks difficult, but pushing through because this was about more than pride. It was about survival. By 5 o'clock, they had commitments for 30 auction items, 3 local businesses willing to sponsor the event, and a quote from Miguel's cousin for equipment rental that was surprisingly affordable. The event was taking shape, becoming real in a way that made Bobby's chest tighten with hope and fear in equal measure. "We should set a date," Claire said, consulting her calendar. "We need enough time to promote it properly, but not so far out that we miss the deadline." "What about the first Saturday in February?" "That gives us 7 weeks." Bobby did the math. The balloon payment was due March 10th. If they held the event February 1st, they'd have 5 weeks to collect donations, process payments, and hopefully present the bank with enough money to save the ranch. It was tight, terrifyingly tight, but it could work. "February 1st, he agreed. "Let's do it." Claire marked it on 3 different calendars, as if making it official through repetition. Then she looked at her father, her expression suddenly vulnerable. "Dad, what if this doesn't work? What if we do everything right and it's still not enough?" Bobby crossed the room and pulled his daughter into a hug. "Then we'll have tried. We'll have fought. And we'll know that we didn't just let it go without a fight. That counts for something, Claire Bear. It counts for a lot." They stood like that for a long moment, father and daughter, the weight of 4 generations pressing down on both of them. Outside, the sun was setting over Henderson land, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. Somewhere in that beautiful, harsh landscape, Daisy was preparing to bring new life into the world. And somewhere, maybe in Medina County, maybe on a stage in some distant city, George Strait was living his life, completely unaware that Claire Henderson was about to ask him to remember a debt his father might not even have known existed. Tomorrow, Claire would mail the letter. Tonight, they would plan as if their entire future depended on one impossible, beautiful long shot. Because it did. 3 weeks into January, the fundraiser had taken on a life of its own. What had started as a desperate plan scratched out on legal pads at Bobby Henderson's kitchen table had evolved into something that surprised everyone involved. A genuine community movement. The article in the Pleasanton Express ran on January 4th with the headline, "4 Generations at Risk. Local Ranch Needs Community Support." The piece included photos of Bobby standing in front of the original Henderson homestead, a timeline of the family's history in Atascosa County, and details about the February 1st fundraiser. Within hours of the paper hitting stands, Claire's phone started ringing. "Miss Henderson, this is Beverly Kowalski from the Ladies' Auxiliary in Poteet. We'd like to organize a bake sale to contribute to your auction." "Claire, it's Todd Branson. I graduated with you from Pleasanton High. My dad's construction company wants to donate a week's worth of free labor for any home improvement project. Would that work?" "Hey there, this is Rita Fuentes. I run the food truck out by the highway. I'd be happy to provide barbecue for your event at cost. Your granddad helped my family when we first came to this county. Time to return the favor." The calls came from friends, acquaintances, and complete strangers. People who'd been helped by the Henderson family over the decades, people who simply believed in preserving ranch heritage, and people who understood that what was happening to Bobby could happen to any of them. The drought didn't discriminate, and neither did the banks. Claire documented everything in a massive spreadsheet that Bobby found both impressive and slightly terrifying. She'd set up a website, created social media accounts, and convinced a local graphic designer to donate a logo featuring a silhouette of the old Henderson ranch house beneath a Texas star. The event had a name now: Roots and Ropes, a celebration of Texas heritage. "Sounds fancier than I expected," Bobby admitted, looking at the poster Claire had printed. "We need to make it feel important, Claire explained. Not just a small local thing, but an event that matters. That way, when people share it online, it spreads further. And spread it did. The Austin American-Statesman picked up the story, running a Sunday feature about the challenges facing small ranchers in South Texas. San Antonio's KSAT-12 sent a reporter who interviewed Bobby in the barn, with Daisy and her week-old colt prominently featured. The segment aired during the evening news, complete with footage of Bobby working cattle and a close-up of the Warren family Bible, where 5 generations of Henderson births and deaths were recorded. After that broadcast, donations started arriving by mail, checks for $20, $50, $100, some from people whose names Bobby didn't recognize, with notes attached. Grew up on a ranch in West Texas. I understand. My grandfather lost his farm in Oklahoma. Wishing you better luck. For the love of the land. Miguel's wife, Patricia, volunteered to coordinate the volunteer committee. Within days, she had 40 people committed to helping with event setup, parking, food service, and cleanup. The planning meetings moved from Bobby's kitchen to the community center in Jordanton, where folding tables were covered with sign-up sheets, maps of the ranch layout, and endless lists of tasks. But despite all the momentum, all the goodwill, the spreadsheet told a sobering truth. They were still less than halfway to their goal. By January 20th, they'd raised and committed approximately $140,000. A staggering amount that would have seemed impossible a month ago, but still $200,000 short of what they needed. Claire sat at Bobby's kitchen table on a gray Tuesday morning, staring at her laptop screen with an expression that mixed pride and frustration. We're doing so well, but it's not enough. We need something big, Dad. Something that takes this from a local event to regional news. Bobby poured himself coffee, his 5th cup of the day. We've got local politicians coming. The state agricultural commissioner is sending a representative, and we're going to have the best damn barbecue in South Texas. What more can we do? Claire didn't answer immediately. Instead, she opened a desk drawer and pulled out an envelope. Bobby recognized it immediately. The letter to George Strait, sealed and stamped, that had been sitting in that drawer for 2 weeks. I've been afraid to mail it, Claire admitted. As long as it's here, there's still possibility. Once I send it and he doesn't respond, that door closes. So send it. Bobby sat down across from her. You wrote a good letter. You explained the situation honestly. If he responds, that's a gift. If he doesn't, we're no worse off than we are right now. Claire nodded slowly. The problem is, I still don't have a good address. His management company has a public mailing address in Nashville. But that goes through so many layers of assistants and lawyers that I doubt he'd ever see it. I need something more direct. Have you tried the team roping connection? I've been trying. I contacted the Texas Team Roping Association, left messages with 3 different people, and got nowhere. It's like trying to reach the president. Claire's frustration was evident. I even called that custom saddle maker over in Medina County who supposedly makes saddles for professional ropers. He was polite, but wouldn't confirm whether he knew George Strait, much less provide a way to contact him. Bobby understood. George Strait was famously private, a man who'd built one of the most successful careers in music history while living a relatively normal life on a Texas ranch. That privacy was protected by layers of people whose job was to keep well-meaning strangers at a distance. What about the rodeo connection? Bobby suggested. There's that big team roping event in Corpus Christi next weekend. Miguel said George competes in those sometimes. Claire's eyes lit up. Could we go? Would that be weird? Just showing up and trying to hand him a letter? It would be a little weird, Bobby admitted. But we're way past worrying about weird. We're 5 weeks from losing everything. Weird is a luxury we can't afford. That Saturday, Bobby, Claire, and Miguel made the 2-hour drive to Corpus Christi for the South Texas Team Roping Championship. The event was held at the county fairgrounds, a sprawling complex of barns and arenas that smelled of hay, leather, and livestock. Familiar scents that made Bobby feel more comfortable than he'd felt in weeks. They paid the entrance fee and wandered through the crowds, watching ropers prepare their horses, check their equipment, and review the competition bracket posted near the main arena. The skill level was extraordinary. These weren't weekend hobbyists, but serious competitors who trained year-round and traveled the circuit chasing prize money and rankings. "How do we even find out if he's here?" Claire whispered, clutching the letter in her jacket pocket. "We ask." Miguel approached a group of ropers near the practice arena. "Excuse me, is George Strait competing today?" One of the men, weathered and bow-legged in the way of lifelong horsemen, shook his head. "George isn't on the roster this weekend. Had to cancel last minute. But his buddy Travis Cunningham is here. They rope together sometimes. That's Travis over there, the guy with the gray felt hat." Miguel thanked him, and the three of them approached Travis Cunningham, who was adjusting his horse's bridle with the methodical attention of someone who'd done this 10,000 times. "Mr. Cunningham?" Claire's voice was steadier than Bobby expected. "I'm sorry to interrupt. My name is Claire Henderson, and I'm trying to reach George Strait about something important. I know this is an unusual request, but would you be willing to pass along a letter?" Travis looked up, his expression guarded. Lots of people want to reach George, usually because they want something. "We do want something," Claire admitted, and Bobby felt a flash of pride at her honesty. "We're trying to save my family's ranch in Atascosa County. There's a connection between our families going back 60 years, and I wanted to invite him to a fundraiser we're holding. I'm not asking you to guarantee anything. I just want to make sure he actually sees the letter, rather than it getting lost in a management office somewhere." Travis studied her for a long moment, then looked at Bobby and Miguel. "You're the father?" "Yes, sir." Bobby extended his hand. "Bobby Henderson. This is my foreman, Miguel Contreras." They shook hands, and Bobby saw Travis's expression shift slightly. The recognition of calluses meeting calluses, the unspoken understanding between men who worked with their hands. "What kind of operation you running?" "Quarter horses and cattle. 540 acres in Atascosa County. Been in my family since 1897. "And you're about to lose it?" "Yes, sir. Bank's calling in a loan my father took out in the 80s. We're doing everything we can, but the math is brutal." Travis was quiet for another moment, then held out his hand. "Give me the letter. I can't promise he'll read it, and I definitely can't promise he'll respond. But I'll make sure it gets to him personally." Claire pulled the envelope from her pocket with shaking hands. "Thank you. Thank you so much." "Don't thank me yet." Travis tucked the letter into his jacket. "George is a good man, one of the best I know. But he's also careful about what he commits to. He gets requests like this all the time." "I understand." Claire's voice was thick with emotion. "Just getting it to him is more than I could have hoped for." They watched Travis lead his horse toward the staging area, the letter containing all their hopes tucked safely in his jacket. Bobby put his arm around Claire's shoulders, and they stood like that while around them the rodeo continued. Announcements crackling over speakers, horses thundering through practice runs, cowboys and cowgirls pursuing the life that Bobby had always lived, and now might lose. The drive home was quiet, each of them lost in thought. They'd done what they could. The letter was delivered, or would be soon. Now, all they could do was wait and keep working. The final 2 weeks before the event became a blur of activity. Miguel and a crew of volunteers transformed the North Pasture into an event space, setting up portable fencing for parking, marking out areas for the stage, food service, and auction display. Claire coordinated with vendors, confirmed the schedule, and managed a volunteer team that had grown to 70 people. Bobby focused on the ranch itself, making sure it looked its best for the visitors who would see it on February 1st. He repaired fences, painted the barn trim, and even planted native wildflower seeds along the entrance road. A gesture toward beauty that felt almost defiant given the circumstances. Daisy's colt, named Legacy by Claire in a moment of painful optimism, grew stronger each day. Bobby would stand at the fence watching the young horse run, his legs still gangly but his spirit already evident, and wonder if Legacy would grow up here or be sold to some other ranch when the Henderson land went to auction. On January 28th, 4 days before the event, Claire's phone rang with an unfamiliar number. She answered, expecting another vendor confirmation. "Is this Claire Henderson?" The voice was male, polite, with a subtle Texas drawl. "Yes, this is Claire." "Miss Henderson, my name is Tom Bradley. I work with George Strait. I understand you sent him a letter about a fundraiser for your family's ranch?" Claire's eyes went wide, and she gestured frantically at Bobby, who was reviewing auction forms at the kitchen table. Yes, I did. About 3 weeks ago. George received it. He wanted me to call and let you know he's interested in attending your event on February 1st. Would that still work?" Claire's hand flew to her mouth. When she spoke, her voice came out as barely more than a whisper. That would be incredible. More than I could have hoped for. George would like to keep this low-key. No major publicity beforehand, no press releases. He'll come as a guest, maybe say a few words if appropriate, and he'd like to contribute to your auction. Would that be acceptable? Yes, absolutely. Claire was crying now, tears streaming down her face while Bobby stared at her in confusion. "Please tell Mr. Strait how grateful we are. He has no idea what this means to our family." "I think he might have some idea," Tom said gently. "George remembers what his father told him about the neighbor who helped save their ranch all those years ago. He's glad to have a chance to return the favor. Someone from our team will reach out tomorrow with logistics details. And Miss Henderson, George asked me to tell you that he's pulling for your family. He hopes this helps. It will. God, it will." Claire ended the call and looked at her father with an expression of pure joy. "Dad, George Strait is coming to our fundraiser." Bobby stood up so fast his chair fell backward. "What?" "He's coming. He read the letter. He remembers what Grandpa Daniel did for his father, and he's coming to help us." For a moment, father and daughter just stared at each other. Then Bobby crossed the room and pulled Claire into a fierce hug, both of them laughing and crying and barely believing what had just happened. Outside, the January sun was setting over Henderson land. In 4 days, George Strait, the king of country music, a man who'd sold more than 100 million records, would stand on that land and help them fight for its survival. The impossible long shot had just become possible, and the Henderson Ranch had just received a fighting chance. The morning of February 1st dawned cold and clear, with a sky so blue it looked painted. Bobby Henderson stood on his porch at 5:30 a.m., holding a mug of coffee and watching the organized chaos unfold across his ranch. Trucks were already arriving, volunteers moving through the semi-darkness with flashlights and purpose, transforming the North Pasture into something that looked more like a fairground than a working ranch. Miguel appeared beside him, carrying his own coffee. "Big day, boss." That's one way to put it. Bobby's stomach was a knot of anxiety and hope. In 12 hours, everything would be decided. Success or failure, salvation or loss. And somewhere in the mix, George Strait would be standing on Henderson land. A connection between past and present that still felt surreal. The stage crew finished setup at 11 last night, Miguel reported. Sound check is scheduled for 9. Food vendors arrive at 10. Portable facilities are already in place. Patricia has the volunteer schedule running like military operations. Bobby shook his head in wonder. I never thought I'd see the day when my ranch looked like this. Makes you proud, doesn't it? All these people showing up for your family. Miguel clapped Bobby on the shoulder. I need to go coordinate the parking team. You should eat something. It's going to be a long day. Inside, Claire was already at the kitchen table, her laptop open, phone pressed to her ear, somehow managing to look polished despite having slept maybe 3 hours. She ended her call and looked at her father. That was Tom Bradley, George's assistant. They'll arrive around 2 o'clock, coming in through the back access road to avoid the main crowd. He wants to walk the property a bit, get a feel for the place before things get too busy. Bobby's heart rate kicked up. George Strait is going to walk my property. Our property, Claire corrected gently. And yes, are you going to be okay? You look like you might pass out. I'm 75% terror, 25% excitement, and 100% desperate for this to work. Bobby sat down. What time are people supposed to arrive? Gates open at 1 o'clock. The event officially starts at 2:30 with your welcome speech. Then the auction runs from 3 to 5. The team roping exhibition is at 5:30, and dinner service starts at 6. When George makes an appearance, we're thinking around 4 during a break in the auction. That gives him flexibility to leave whenever he's comfortable. The day's schedule felt both meticulously planned and impossibly fragile, like a house of cards that could collapse with one wrong breath. Bobby thought about the speech he'd written and rewritten a dozen times, the words he'd chosen to explain what this land meant, why it mattered, and what losing it would cost. Those words felt inadequate now, too small to contain the weight of 4 generations. By 8 a.m., the ranch was fully awake. Bobby walked through the organized chaos, overwhelmed by the transformation. The north pasture had been converted into a proper event space, with a substantial stage at one end, rows of tables and chairs arranged for dining, an auction display area showcasing donated items, and a separate section for the live music that would run throughout the afternoon. The morning of February 1st dawned cold and clear, with a sky so blue it looked painted. Bobby Henderson stood on his porch at 5:30 a.m., holding a mug of coffee and watching the organized chaos unfold across his ranch. Trucks were already arriving, volunteers moving through the semi-darkness with flashlights and purpose, transforming the north pasture into something that looked more like a fairground than a working ranch. Miguel appeared beside him, carrying his own coffee. Big day, boss. That's one way to put it. Bobby's stomach was a knot of anxiety and hope. In 12 hours, everything would be decided. Success or failure, salvation or loss. And somewhere in the mix, George Strait would be standing on Henderson land, a connection between past and present that still felt surreal. The stage crew finished setup at 11 last night, Miguel reported. Sound check is scheduled for 9. Food vendors arrive at 10. Portable facilities are already in place. Patricia has the volunteer schedule running like military operations. Bobby shook his head in wonder. I never thought I'd see the day when my ranch looked like this. Makes you proud, doesn't it? All these people showing up for your family. Miguel clapped Bobby on the shoulder. I need to go coordinate the parking team. You should eat something. It's going to be a long day. Inside, Claire was already at the kitchen table, her laptop open, phone pressed to her ear, somehow managing to look polished despite having slept maybe 3 hours. She ended her call and looked at her father. That was Tom Bradley, George's assistant. They'll arrive around 2 o'clock, coming in through the back access road to avoid the main crowd. He wants to walk the property a bit, get a feel for the place before things get too busy. Bobby's heart rate kicked up. George Strait is going to walk my property. Our property, Claire corrected gently. And yes, are you going to be okay? You look like you might pass out. I'm 75% terror, 25% excitement, and 100% desperate for this to work. Bobby sat down. What time are people supposed to arrive? Gates open at 1 o'clock. The event officially starts at 2:30 with your welcome speech. Then the auction runs from 3 to 5. The team roping exhibition is at 5:30, and dinner service starts at 6. When George makes an appearance. We're thinking around 4 during a break in the auction. That gives him flexibility to leave whenever he's comfortable. The day's schedule felt both meticulously planned and impossibly fragile, like a house of cards that could collapse with one wrong breath. Bobby thought about the speech he'd written and rewritten a dozen times. The words he'd chosen to explain what this land meant, why it mattered, and what losing it would cost. Those words felt inadequate now, too small to contain the weight of 4 generations. By 8 a.m., for the ranch was fully awake. Bobby walked through the organized chaos, overwhelmed by the transformation. The north pasture had been converted into a proper event space, with a substantial stage at one end, rows of tables and chairs arranged for dining, an auction display area showcasing donated items, and a separate section for the live music that would run throughout the afternoon. Rita Fuentes was already setting up her barbecue operation, massive smokers billowing fragrant smoke that made Bobby's mouth water despite his anxiety. The ladies' auxiliary from Poteet had claimed 3 tables for their baked goods, displaying pies, cakes, and cookies that looked like they belonged in a magazine. A local brewery from San Antonio had donated several kegs of craft beer, and the wine vendor from Fredericksburg was arranging bottles on a display table with the care of someone handling fine art. "Mr. Henderson," a young woman with a clipboard hurried over. "I'm Jessica Ramirez from the event planning company. We need to do a final walkthrough of the auction area. Can you spare 15 minutes? Bobby spent the next hour being pulled in a dozen directions, approving the stage setup, reviewing the auction order, checking on the horses for the roping exhibition, and trying to stay out of the way of people who clearly knew what they were doing better than he did. By 11 o'clock, when the first reporters arrived, the ranch looked ready for something Bobby never imagined. A celebration that was also a fight for survival. The crew from KSAT-12 wanted to film Bobby walking through his land, talking about the ranch's history. The reporter, a young man named David Chen, asked thoughtful questions about drought, debt, and the changing economics of small ranching operations. Bobby tried to stay focused, to give good answers, but his mind kept drifting to the clock, counting down to 1 o'clock when the gates would open, and to 2 o'clock when George Strait would arrive. At 12:30, Bobby retreated to the house to change clothes. He'd chosen his best jeans, a crisp white button-down shirt, his good boots, and the belt buckle he'd won at a team roping competition 30 years ago. Looking at himself in the mirror, he saw a 58-year-old man who'd worked himself gray, trying to hold on to something that mattered, fighting a battle that shouldn't have been necessary, but was. Claire appeared in the doorway, wearing a blue dress that somehow managed to look both elegant and appropriate for a ranch setting. "You look good, Dad." "I look terrified." "That too," she smiled, "but also dignified, strong, like a man who's built something worth saving." At 1 o'clock exactly, Miguel radioed that the first vehicles were arriving. Bobby and Claire walked to the entrance of the north pasture and watched as cars, trucks, and SUVs began flowing through the gates in an orderly stream, guided by volunteers in bright yellow vests. The parking area filled quickly, 50 vehicles, then 100, then more than Bobby could easily count. People emerged carrying folding chairs, coolers, and children. They wore boots and jeans, sundresses and cowboy hats, the casual elegance of rural Texas. Bobby recognized many faces, neighbors, old friends, people he'd helped over the years. But there were strangers too, people from Austin and San Antonio and towns whose names he'd barely heard, all coming together for a cause they believed in. "Look at this," Claire whispered, her eyes shining. "Look at what we did." By 2 o'clock, the crowd numbered somewhere between 400 and 500 people. The local band was playing on stage, classic country and Texas swing that got people tapping their feet. Food vendors were doing brisk business, the beer garden was packed, and children were running through the open spaces with the wild freedom that only happens outdoors. Bobby was near the house, reviewing his speech notes one final time, when Miguel appeared with an expression that made Bobby's heart skip. "He's here, boss." Just pulled up to the back gate. Bobby followed Miguel to the old access road that ran along the eastern property line. A white F-250, newer than Bobby's but equally dust-covered, was parked near the gate. 2 men stood beside it. One Bobby didn't recognize, who must be Tom Bradley, and the other unmistakable even at a distance. George Strait looked exactly like Bobby would have expected, and somehow completely different. He wore jeans, boots, and a blue shirt, his signature cowboy hat shading his face. At 73 years old, he moved with the ease of someone who'd spent his life on ranches and around horses. But it was his presence that struck Bobby. Not the overwhelming celebrity aura you might expect, but something quieter, more grounded. This was a man who understood the land, who'd lived a version of the life Bobby was trying to preserve. "Mr. Strait." Bobby's voice came out steadier than he felt. "I'm Bobby Henderson. This is my foreman, Miguel Contreras. Thank you for coming. I can't tell you what this means." George shook Bobby's hand with a firm grip. "Call me George, and I should be thanking you. My daddy never forgot what your father did for our family. When Tom showed me your daughter's letter, I knew I wanted to be here." "This is the land?" George looked around, taking in the pastures, the old barn, the creek bed winding through the property. "How far back does your property line go?" "About a mile east, then south to Farm Road 140. Bobby pointed. "Your father's old place bordered us on the northeast corner. That stand of live oaks over there. My great-grandfather and yours planted those together around 1900. They'd get together after church some Sundays and work on shared projects." George's expression softened. "I didn't know that. My daddy talked about this area, about the neighbors who helped us, but I never knew the details. He passed in 2013, and there was so much I never thought to ask him." "I understand that feeling," Bobby said quietly. "My father died in 2008. There's a lot I wish I'd asked too." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. 2 men connected by land and legacy, and the complicated relationship everyone has with their fathers. Then George gestured toward the pasture. "Would you mind showing me around a bit? I'd like to see the place before things get too busy." For the next 30 minutes, Bobby gave George Strait a tour of the Henderson Ranch. They walked the fence line where the fire had stopped in 1963, examined the old homestead foundation from 1897, and visited the family cemetery where Daniel Henderson rested beside his wife. George asked questions about the operation, the cattle, the horses, and the economics of modern ranching with the informed curiosity of someone who genuinely understood the life. At the foaling barn, they stopped to admire Daisy and Legacy. George ran his hand along the colt's neck with practiced gentleness. "Beautiful animal. Good bloodlines. The best I've got." Bobby's voice caught. "If we lose the ranch, I'll have to sell him. Breaks my heart to think about it." George looked at Bobby with an expression that held deep understanding. "That's not going to happen. We're not going to let it happen." They walked back toward the event space, where the crowd had grown even larger. People were eating, drinking, bidding on silent auction items, and enjoying the music. No one had noticed George yet. His back gate arrival and the private tour had kept him away from the main gathering. But that was about to change. Claire met them near the stage, her professional composure barely containing her excitement. "Mr. Strait, thank you so much for being here. Whenever you're ready, we can make the announcement." "Let's do it now," George said. "And please, call me George." The band finished their song, and Claire took the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all so much for being here today. Your support means everything to the Henderson family. Before we continue with the auction, I have a special announcement. When my grandfather Daniel Henderson organized local ranchers to fight a fence fire in August 1963, he helped save several neighboring properties, including one owned by the Strait family. Today, we have a very special guest who's here to honor that connection and help us save this ranch. Please welcome George Strait." For a moment, the crowd was silent, processing what they'd just heard. Then George stepped onto the stage, and the reaction was explosive. Cheers, applause, people jumping to their feet in disbelief. Cell phones appeared everywhere, capturing the moment. But George's attention was focused on the people themselves, his expression warm and genuine. "Thank you," George said when the applause finally died down. "I appreciate that welcome. I'm here today because Bobby Henderson's father did something important for my family a long time ago. He helped save my daddy's ranch when it was threatened. And he did it because that's what neighbors do. They show up when it matters. Today, I'm showing up because the Henderson family needs their neighbors, and I'm honored to be counted among them." The crowd erupted again, and Bobby felt tears streaming down his face. He wasn't ashamed. Looking around, he saw he wasn't alone. Grown men and women crying openly, moved by the simple power of the moment. "Now, I understand there's an auction happening," George continued. "I'd like to donate something if that's all right. How about a private concert? Whoever wins gets me and my band performing at a venue of their choice, within reason, for up to 100 people. All proceeds go directly to saving this ranch." Claire's mouth fell open. The auction coordinator, a professional from San Antonio who'd donated her services, looked stunned. "Mr. Strait, that's incredibly generous. That item alone could bring in—" "Whatever it brings in, it's for the Hendersons," George said firmly. "Let's start the bidding at $10,000. The bidding was furious. Local business owners competed with wealthy ranchers from surrounding counties, the price climbing in $1,000 increments. $20,000, $30,000, $45,000. Finally, at $60,000, a San Antonio businessman named Gerald Hoffman won, and the crowd gave him a standing ovation for his generosity. But George wasn't done. "I'd also like to make a personal donation. Tom, can you bring me that envelope?" Tom Bradley appeared with a manila envelope. George opened it and pulled out a check, which he held up for the crowd to see. "This is a check for $100,000, made out to the Henderson Ranch Preservation Fund. It's my way of paying back a debt that's 60 years overdue." The crowd went absolutely wild. Bobby's legs felt weak, and Miguel had to steady him. $100,000. Combined with the auction item, George had just contributed $160,000 in a matter of minutes. Added to everything they'd already raised, they were suddenly, impossibly, within reach of their goal. George spent the next hour signing autographs, taking photos, and talking with attendees. He was gracious and patient, treating every person like they mattered. From the elderly rancher who wanted to share a story about seeing George perform in 1985 to the young girl who shyly asked for a picture, Bobby watched in awe, seeing not just a superstar, but a man who genuinely cared about the people who supported him. The auction continued with renewed energy. Items that might have sold for modest amounts now commanded premium prices. Bidders caught up in the emotion and generosity of the moment. The weekend at Dixie Dude Ranch went for $4,000. The custom boots sold for $2,500. Even simple items like the baked goods and dinner certificates brought in far more than expected. At 5:30, the team roping exhibition began. Bobby and Miguel demonstrated proper technique, then invited audience members to try their hand at roping a stationary dummy steer. George joined in, showing the crowd his own considerable skills. And the informal competition became one of the day's highlights. Laughter and good-natured competition. The kind of authentic Texas experience that couldn't be manufactured. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Bobby stood on the stage one final time. The crowd had thinned slightly, families with young children heading home. But several hundred people remained, enjoying their barbecue dinners and the warmth of community. "I prepared a speech," Bobby said, his voice carrying across the pasture through the sound system. "Spent days writing it, trying to find the right words to explain what this land means, why it matters so much. But standing here now, looking at all of you, I realize the land already explained itself. You're here because you understand. You understand that ranches like this one aren't just businesses. They're heritage, they're history, they're a way of life that matters. And you showed up to fight for it." He paused, composing himself. "My great-grandfather William bought this land in 1897 with money he'd saved working odd jobs for 15 years. He built the first cabin with his own hands, cleared brush, dug wells, and raised cattle through droughts, depressions, and 2 world wars. My grandfather expanded it, my father worked it, and I've spent my whole life trying to be worthy of their legacy. Today, because of all of you, that legacy gets to continue. My daughter Claire and her children, and maybe their children, will walk this land, and they'll know that when it mattered most, a community came together. A neighbor remembered an old debt, and good people decided that some things are worth saving." The applause was long and heartfelt. Bobby saw Claire crying, Miguel wiping his eyes, and throughout the crowd, people holding each other, moved by the simple truth that when people come together, impossible things become possible. As the evening wore on and the event wound down, George found Bobby near the barn. "I need to head out soon, but I wanted to say goodbye properly. George, I don't know how to thank you." Bobby's voice was thick with emotion. "What you did today?" "What I did was remember where I come from," George interrupted gently. "My daddy never forgot that your father was there when it counted. That matters. Legacy matters. And I'm glad I could help make sure yours continues." They shook hands, then George pulled Bobby into a brief hug, the kind of embrace that happens between men who understand each other without needing many words. Then George was gone, disappearing into the twilight as quietly as he'd arrived, leaving behind a day that would be talked about in Atascosa County for generations. By 9 o'clock, as volunteers cleaned up and the last attendees headed home, Claire and Bobby sat on the porch with laptops and calculators, adding up the final numbers. Silent auction items, live auction proceeds, direct donations. The online fundraising page that had exploded after George's appearance was shared on social media. Claire looked up from her computer, her expression disbelieving. "Dad, we did it. We raised $387,000. Bobby stared at her. "Say that again. $387,000. After we pay the event expenses and the bank, we'll have cleared the debt and have a small cushion left over." Claire started laughing and crying at the same time. "We actually did it. We saved the ranch." Bobby pulled his daughter into a fierce hug. both of them shaking with relief and joy and exhaustion. 4 generations of Henderson legacy, saved by a community that cared, and a man who remembered a debt that transcended money. The Henderson Ranch would survive, and Bobby would spend the rest of his life making sure everyone knew that it survived, because when it mattered most, people showed up. That was a debt he could never repay, but he would spend his life trying. March 10th arrived with the cruel irony of perfect weather. 72 degrees, gentle breeze, the kind of day that made Texas feel like paradise. Exactly the kind of day Bobby had always feared he'd spend signing away his family's legacy. Instead, he walked into First National Bank of Atascosa County carrying a cashier's check for $340,000 and a sense of profound satisfaction he'd never expected to feel again. Richard Patterson's expression when Bobby placed the check on his desk was worth every sleepless night, every moment of anxiety, every ounce of pride Bobby had swallowed in asking for help. The banker's practiced sympathy evaporated, replaced by something that might have been respect, or might have been simple surprise that Bobby had actually pulled it off. "This satisfies the balloon payment in full," Patterson said, reviewing the check with barely concealed disappointment. "I'll have our loan department process the paperwork. You should receive confirmation within 3 business days that the lien has been released. I'll be waiting for it." Bobby stood, extending his hand not because he felt generous, but because it was the right thing to do. Patterson shook it, and Bobby walked out of the bank a free man, or as free as any rancher could be, still owing monthly payments, but no longer facing the immediate threat of foreclosure. Miguel was waiting in the truck, having insisted on accompanying Bobby to this final confrontation with the bank. "How'd it go, boss?" "It's done. The ranch is saved." Bobby climbed into the passenger seat, suddenly feeling every one of his 58 years. "Let's go home." The drive back to the ranch was quiet, both men processing what had happened over the past 2 months. It felt longer than 2 months, felt like a lifetime compressed into 8 weeks of terror, hope, work, and ultimate salvation. The fundraiser was already becoming legend in Atascosa County, the story growing with each retelling: the desperate rancher, the community that rallied, the country music king who showed up to pay an ancient debt. But for Bobby, the real story was simpler and more profound. It was about people who showed up. It was about Rita Fuentes remembering that Bobby's father had helped her family decades ago. It was about Beverly Kowalski organizing a bake sale even though she'd never met Bobby before. It was about Travis Cunningham agreeing to deliver a letter when he had no obligation to do so. It was about George Strait honoring his father's memory by helping a neighbor's son save what his family had built. Most of all, it was about Claire, his brilliant, determined daughter, who had refused to let Bobby surrender without a fight. When they pulled up to the ranch, Claire's car was already in the driveway. She'd driven down from Austin for this moment, wanting to be present when the debt was officially paid. She emerged from the house as Bobby got out of the truck, her expression hopeful and anxious. "Well?" she asked. "It's done." Bobby's voice broke. "The ranch is ours, free and clear of the balloon payment." Claire ran to him, and they held each other in the driveway, while Miguel discreetly headed to the barn to give them privacy. Father and daughter, 4 generations of legacy secured through love and stubbornness and the kindness of neighbors. "Thank you," Bobby whispered into Claire's hair. "If you hadn't pushed me, hadn't organized everything, hadn't found that letter and tracked down George Strait, we did it together, Dad. That's what family does." The weeks that followed took on a surreal quality. The Henderson Ranch became something of a local celebrity, with people driving by just to see the place George Strait had saved. A writer from Texas Monthly came to interview Bobby for a feature article about small ranching operations and community support. The state agricultural commissioner visited, using the Henderson story as an example of why Texas needed better lending protections for family farms. Bobby handled the attention with the same steady grace he'd shown throughout the crisis. Grateful but uncomfortable with praise, always redirecting credit to Claire, to Miguel, to the community, to George. When reporters asked about his plans for the future, he kept his answers simple. "I'm going to keep ranching, going to keep doing what my family's done for 4 generations. And I'm going to remember that I owe a debt to a whole lot of people." In early April, Bobby received a package with a return address in Medina County. Inside was a handwritten note on simple stationery. "Bobby, I hope the ranch is doing well. I wanted you to have this." It's a photo my daddy kept in his office for years. "He never forgot what your father did for our family. Keep fighting the good fight. The land is worth it. George." The photograph was old, the colors faded, showing 2 men standing by a fence line, both in work clothes, both smiling. Bobby recognized his father immediately. Young, strong, full of the confidence that came from not yet knowing how hard life could hit you. The other man had to be John Byron Strait Sr., George's father, looking remarkably like his famous son. On the back, in faded ink, Daniel Henderson and John Strait. Boundary fence repair, April 1962. Bobby had the photo framed and hung it in the living room. A reminder that legacies weren't just about land. They were about relationships, about neighbors helping neighbors, about debts that echoed across generations. Claire visited every other weekend, as she had before the crisis. But now their time together felt different, lighter, no longer shadowed by the fear of loss. They talked about the future now, about Claire eventually taking over the ranch when Bobby was ready to slow down, about modernizing operations while preserving traditions, about what the next generation of Hendersons might build on this land. "I've been thinking," Claire said one Saturday in May, as they sat on the porch watching Legacy run through the pasture. "What if we started offering ranch tours? Educational programs for school groups, showing them what ranching life is really like. We could create a revenue stream that doesn't depend entirely on cattle and horse sales." Bobby considered this. A year ago, he would have resisted, viewing it as turning the ranch into a tourist attraction, cheapening what it meant. But the fundraiser had taught him that sharing the ranch, letting people connect with it, had value. People cared about heritage when they understood it, when they could see it and touch it and feel its importance. "Let's look into it," he said. "But we do it right. No gimmicks, just honest education about ranching life." Agreed. Claire made a note on her ever-present legal pad. "I also think we should establish a fund, maybe a small scholarship for kids from ranching families who want to study agriculture or veterinary medicine. A way to pay forward what people did for us." Bobby looked at his daughter with profound pride. This was legacy too. Not just preserving what had been, but building something new. Using their second chance to help others facing similar challenges. Summer arrived with its familiar brutality, temperatures climbing into the triple digits. But this year's heat felt manageable in a way it hadn't before. Bobby had money in the bank, his immediate debts under control, and a plan for the future. The ranch wasn't just surviving. It was beginning to thrive again. In June, Miguel's son Antonio graduated from Texas A&M with a degree in ranch management. Bobby offered him a job as assistant foreman, creating a path for Antonio to eventually take over Miguel's role. 3 generations of Henderson leadership supported by 3 generations of Contreras expertise. That felt right. Felt like the kind of legacy worth building. On the anniversary of the fundraiser, February 1st of the following year, Bobby and Claire hosted a smaller gathering, a thank you barbecue, for the core group of volunteers who'd made everything possible. About 50 people came, including Rita Fuentes, Beverly Kowalski, Patricia Contreras, and the event planner from Floresville. They ate, shared stories, and celebrated not just the Henderson Ranch, but the power of community. George Strait couldn't attend, he was on tour, but he sent a case of wine from a Texas vineyard with a note that read, "To neighbors who show up when it matters. Proud to know you all." As the sun set over Henderson land that evening, Bobby stood with Claire and Miguel, watching their guests laugh and talk, children playing in the same fields where Bobby had played as a child and his father before him. "You know what's strange?" Bobby said. "I almost feel grateful for the crisis. Not for the fear or the stress, but for what it taught me. I spent so many years trying to handle everything alone, thinking asking for help was weakness. Turns out, it's the opposite. Letting people in, letting them care. That's strength. Grandpa Daniel would be proud of you," Claire said softly. "He helped the Strait family because it was the right thing to do, not expecting anything in return. And 60 years later, that kindness saved us. That's a lesson worth remembering." "It is." Bobby put his arm around his daughter. "And it's a lesson I'm going to make sure gets passed down to your kids. And their kids. The Henderson Ranch isn't just land. It's a reminder that what we do matters, that the help we give echoes forward, and that we're stronger together than we could ever be alone." Miguel raised his beer bottle. "To legacy! To legacy!" Bobby and Claire echoed, and the three of them stood there as the sky turned from orange to purple to deep blue, stars beginning to emerge like promises. The Henderson Ranch had been saved. But more than that, it had been transformed. It was no longer just a property passed down through generations. It was a living testament to community, to kindness remembered and returned, to the stubborn refusal to give up on things that matter. Bobby Henderson would work this land for the rest of his life. Claire would take over when he was ready. And someday, her children would stand where he stood now, looking over pastures and creek beds and the old homestead foundations, knowing that they were part of something bigger than themselves. 4 generations had built this place. A 5th would continue the work. And the debt that saved it, the debt George Strait paid to honor his father's memory and Daniel Henderson's kindness, would be remembered and retold. A story about neighbors and legacy and the beautiful truth that sometimes, when everything seems lost, one act of generosity can change everything. The Henderson Ranch would endure, not because it was easy, but because people cared enough to fight for it. And that was a legacy worth more than any amount of money, worth more than any piece of paper declaring ownership. It was a legacy of the heart, written in the soil of South Texas, preserved by the kindness of strangers who became friends, and secured by a country music legend who understood that some debts can't be measured in dollars. They're measured in honor, in memory, and in the simple act of showing up when it matters most. Bobby Henderson had learned that lesson in the hardest way possible. But standing here now, surrounded by friends and family, looking over land that would pass to another generation, he wouldn't change a single moment of the journey. Because some things are worth fighting for, some legacies are worth preserving, and some debts, paid after 60 years of patience, create moments that truly are unforgettable. The ranch was saved, the legacy secured, and the Henderson family would spend generations making sure that when their neighbors needed them, they would show up just as surely as their community had shown up for them. That was the real inheritance. Not land, but love. Not property, but purpose. Not wealth, but the kind of richness that comes from knowing you're part of something bigger, something that matters, something worth preserving for those who come after. As the last guests departed and the stars filled the Texas sky, Bobby Henderson walked his land one more time, his boots crunching on familiar soil, his heart full of gratitude he'd never be able to fully express. 4 generations down, many more to go. The Henderson Ranch endured,